Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Will Wright. You are watching the 7th in a series of candidate forums that the AIA Los Angeles chapter has organized with all of the leading mayor of LA candidates. We really look forward to our opportunity here to hear from two candidates, Ramit Varma and also Gina Viola. What we're going to do with this session is we're going to have 30 minutes of Q&A with Mr. Varma, and then 30 minutes of Q&A with Ms. Viola. So with that, we'll get started. And I really appreciate everyone's willingness to connect with us and to hear your campaign thoughts. So Mr. Varma, we'll get started with you, and we're going to pin you so that everybody understands. Share us a little bit of your intro and tell us, why are you running for the mayor of Los Angeles as opposed to, congressional representative or any other leadership position that we all need at this moment in time?
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity. I was in business for the last 19 years. I started a small business when I graduated from business school at UCLA in the education space. And I've spent the last 19 years building that business, and was very fortunate to be able to sell it last year. And after I sold the business, I looked around the city, which I love so much. I believe LA is the greatest city in the history of the world. And people always sort of open their eyes a little bit when I say that. And the reason I say it is because there's no time in human history that has had more diversity, more equity, more safety than this moment in history. And I don't think there's any place in this world that's better than Los Angeles. But what I was seeing with I have 3 small children, 5, 7, and 9-year-old boys. And I'm looking at the city that I want them to grow up in, and I want them to be able to grow old in. They're going to live in the city for 75 or 80 years, hopefully, right? Maybe 90 years. I want this city to be designed for them. And I think in order to have a city that is designed for the future, we need to have people in leadership positions who are of the next generation, who are looking to incorporate technology, incorporate new design philosophies and theories and city planning into the city that we're going to be able to live in for the next 75 years. And I really just wasn't seeing that with the types of folks that were running for mayor. Now, the reason I chose to do this as mayor and not something else is because I think there's a wide gulf between the job of an executive and the job of a legislator. Okay, so 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial, obviously. I think that in the executive seat, we need people with real executive experience. I think there's just a very different set of skills that makes someone effective as a legislator. And so I was looking at this role specifically because it is the executive position. And I want to come in as an outsider who has no ties to special interests, who has no ulterior motive but the benefit of the city. I'm not a politician. I have no plans on further office. They say leaders run for the next generation and politicians run for the next election. And I really feel like I want to come in, do my years of public service. I think we can change the trajectory of this city pretty rapidly. And I'd like to see that done.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Well, we really look forward to, having a little bit of a chance to connect. I do not know if you're familiar with the American Institute of Architects or not, but we'll, for our questions with you, really want to focus on land use and housing and our homelessness crisis. But also it's about placemaking. And I'm wondering, what is your connection to architecture and urban design? And, maybe give us a little bit of insight about the values you have carrying forward with that.
Sure. So, I have built 5 homes here in Los Angeles. I have renovated a couple. And these are things that I've sort of done on the side. So I have a very strong design sensibility, and architecture is something that is very important to me. I think that we see a lot about a city, and we see a lot about the culture of a city in its architecture. When I was in Mexico City a few weeks ago and did an architecture tour of Mexico City, because you can see the development of a city's or a country's culture through their architecture. So something that I find very important. Whenever I travel the world, I go to the great architectural sites. Right, I've been to the Taj Mahal in India. Brings me to my knees every time. I can't imagine how each time I go there, I am as struck by the perfection of the curves and the domes. But I am, and so this is something that is important to me on a personal level. But where I really think the rubber meets the road, and if you don't mind, I'll sort of roll into this conversation around homelessness, around city planning. We have, I think, the greatest challenge of our generation is going to be this wealth inequality challenge that we're in right now. It's a really, really big problem, and it's one that's only getting worse. And the consequences of this wealth inequality problem are seen on the streets when we see the residents in single family homes. Like if you owned a home 15 years ago, you've done nothing, and in the last 15 years, you've amassed a giant nest egg of wealth because of the property value. The children of those people, 25-year-old, 30-year-old, 35-year-old people, are renters. Their rent keeps rising, and they're almost never going to be able to catch up to the home ownership. I think this is a real existential problem for the city, because if people can't afford to live here, young people can't afford to live here and put down roots, they will leave, and we're already seeing them leave. Okay, so I think the question then becomes, well, what do you do about that, right? And I think the answer to me is very straightforward. It is high density housing. Okay, we need to have a lot more high density housing in this city. But I understand the reason why we have had such resistance to high density housing. Before I moved to LA in 2000, right, 22 years ago, and I moved here from the East Coast, and all we heard about LA was traffic and smog, right? Those were the brand identity characteristics of LA. I understand the traffic is an issue, and it's one that's on people's minds, and they're scared that by building a tall building, you're going to have a lot more traffic. Well, this is a perfect example to me of yesterday's thinking versus tomorrow's thinking, right? Like in yesterday's thinking, you had a building, you had to put 25, 30%, whatever amount of the space was for parking spots for all the automobiles, right? We've been built around this amazing technology in the 50s, which was the automobile, right? We built this city with suburbs and connectivity because you could get in your car and drive around. The problem is that the expectations, the planning that went in, first of all, wasn't sort of, it wasn't broad planning, it was sort of piecemeal planning, if you would even call it that. And the expectation of the number of people we're 10 times the number of people in the city than anyone would ever have imagined. And so we're in a moment where we need to look to the future and say, what kinds of technologies can we bring to bear to allow for this kind of high density housing so that we can have our young people afford to live and stay in the city? And there are several things we can do, okay? Firstly, we need to change the way we think about automobiles and automobile usage. And we're already starting to see that, right? Younger people, millennials, in a lot of cases, aren't buying cars because they are just using rideshare services, right? So there's ride shares, there's peer sharing of cars. There is delivery services, tremendous numbers of delivery services for foods and for goods and for pharmacy items. And you've got Amazon. You've got work from home, right? So people don't need to be in their car driving from one suburb to the next, clogging up the highways. So, what do people actually do get in their cars for? We can use data science to see, okay, they go to the grocery store a lot. If we're going to build one of these tall buildings, let's require that it has an anchor tenant as a grocery store that includes a pharmacy to reduce the number of reasons people would have for getting in their cars. And I think if we do that, we can rapidly increase the housing stock, which we have to, which will bring down the cost of housing, which allows more people to get on that escalator to wealth, because the wealth separation that's happening is an unsustainable thing for the city. We've seen it for zooming out to like a civilization level. Anytime you start seeing this level of wealth inequality, you are doomed for a crash. Like we will crash as a society in the next 20 years if we don't figure this thing out. And that's something that as a person who himself wants to live in the city for the next 40 years, God willing, I live another 40 years, right? I'm 47 years old. If I can live in the city for another 40 years, I want it to be the city that is the city of opportunity and the city of creativity. I mean, we are all those things, right? We just need to unstick this sort of sclerotic sort of set of regulations and permitting and all the things that we make it difficult to do development. Like there's this sort of strange anti-development, anti-business, undertone to a lot of the conversations I hear the career politicians having. I'm the opposite of that. I think we need to build our way to prosperity. And if we don't, then what we're actually doing is we're just keeping people down and we're letting the rich continue to get wealthier and wealthier.
Well, thank you for that response. And I don't know how familiar you are with the housing element update, the process that the city of LA is going through with their regional housing needs assessment numbers, and the Southern California Association of Government has asked for for us to identify locations for 400,000 plus units of housing over the next 10 years. And, I agree, we desperately need this housing, but the question becomes, how do you work with the neighborhood groups to allow the housing to happen in their neighborhoods, especially on the west side of town where you have a lot of jobs located, a lot more high opportunity areas. So as the next mayor, how would you sort of leverage your position, your leadership position, to inspire those neighborhoods to allow more housing?
I think, Will, you said exactly the right word. That is what leadership is. It is inspiring people, right? And I think that people, they need to be able to visualize a plan, right? And I think that's really the issue. Now, does it mean that none of our neighborhoods' character is going to change? No, it doesn't mean that. Like, the city is going to change, and we need to get people to understand that and to be on board with that change, right? But I've talked to a lot of neighborhood council folks, and these are well-meaning people, and they're good people, and they're reasonable people, right? But I think what ends up happening, and what has happened, is that people have gotten so pulled into their sort of corners that they're stuck in these corners. Everything feels like it's a zero-sum game. And what I've done as a leader in my business career for years and years is I've helped people see that that a lot of, like, there are very few instances where it's truly a zero-sum game. And so if we can show these people and have people just begin to get into real conversations with each other and really, empathically understand where the other side is coming from, I think we'll end up finding a third solution, which makes a lot of sense. My business partner and I, so I speak in the business school at Anderson, UCLA, a couple times a year, and we talk about our business story. And the teacher loves this one part of it because he's like, okay, I told you guys you should never do what Ramit and Jake did. So we started a business together, and we're 50-50 partners. And like, the first thing they tell you is that you should never be a 50-50 partner of somebody, because how are you ever going to make any decisions, right? You have no one who has the ability to actually say, this is what we're going to do. Well, it teaches you how to collaborate. I will tell you that, right? And we built a very successful business, the two of us, as 50-50 partners for 19 years. We're both people of character and integrity. That was very important to us. We had a one-page operating agreement for most of the 19 years that we were in business together. And what we would find is that when he started in one place and I started in another place, through our creative, constructive collaboration process, we always end up in a third place that was better than either of the places that we started. And I am an optimist, and I deeply believe that we can do that across the city, where we can solve the needs. We get to the real root understanding of the needs of the neighborhoods and the needs of the city, and that it wouldn't be balancing them where somebody needs to win and somebody needs to lose. I think we can come up with solutions where everybody is enriched by the outcomes.
Thank you. Any thoughts on how to prevent displacement, or how do we really preserve the neighborhoods that are homes to people that currently are being pressured out because of whether the increase in rent, or the fact that their building needs to be rehabilitated or renovated? And what are some of your displacement strategies, or your strategies to prevent displacement and to preserve the character of a neighborhood?
Yeah, I think that this comes down to investment. It really does. It comes down to investing in those communities. And for me, when I say investment, I'm talking about direct investment. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time on the West Side. As I mentioned, I got an MBA from UCLA. Like, I'm pretty dialed into the West Side business community. Okay, and if you walk around Santa Monica, you cannot not trip over a venture capitalist who's trying to throw money at you for some kind of a business. Okay, they're everywhere. They're like fleas. Okay, so there's tons of people with money who are looking to invest. There are tons of people who are looking to start businesses, and there's tons of people you can look to for mentorship. Okay, that ecosystem is really powerful. It's driven a lot of wealth generation for the people who are part of that ecosystem. I think that we can take the same kind of an ecosystem and build it in the poorer areas of our city, so that young people, as they come out of school, high school, not even necessarily going to college, they come over, you're in your 20s, you're in your 30s, say, okay, I'm working as a plumber. I want to start my own plumbing business. I need to buy a truck. I need to buy some tools. The city should be providing grants to those people. Okay, like on the West Side, the venture community is built around and is designed for home runs. Okay, so they're going to put money in, but they need to get their 10x, their 30x return. that's how they can basically make their economic model work. We don't need that on the other parts of the city. If we take a person who starts his own plumbing business and seed him or her and get them started in this business, and she can create jobs for 5 of her friends, we're going to be sowing the seeds that will create generational change in those communities. And that's the thing that will prevent the displacement, right? Now, the other part of the reason that people are being displaced, again, it comes back to the fact that we are, as you said, 500,000 units short from a housing standpoint, okay? So when you can't afford housing in the places where you are, you're going to go to historically poorer neighborhoods, and you're going to be buying up homes there, right? This is a symptom of our housing issue. It's not in itself, I mean, it's certainly a problem, but it's a problem that we need to solve at the root. And we need to really be attacking the roots of these problems. And I think that's something that the government has been, largely ineffective and ineffectual at doing.
Thank you. So, one of the questions I've asked all of the candidates so far is, really about, the damages that have been done by redlining. Historically, LA is, we're still as a community suffering from some of the policy decisions. What are some of the proactive initiatives that you would bring to the table to address, the inequities that have been baked into the system, with regards to the way land use has been allocated throughout the city?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take you back to the answer I just gave. I think that investing heavily, and when I say heavily, I'm talking like $100 to $200 million a year in entrepreneurship grants for people in typically historically underserved communities. Okay, I don't believe in handouts. Okay, like there's universal basic income in the current budget, and there's a $25 million universal basic income pilot in the current budget. I think that is the wrong plan, and I think it sends the wrong message. Okay. People in these communities are looking for opportunities. They want to work hard, they want to make money, but they don't know how, right? They're just like, somebody show me how. Like, how can I do this? Well, we know how. This is not a magical thing. I mean, when I came to this city, I came as a student. I didn't have a car. Okay, I had a bicycle that I would ride around from, I lived in Santa Monica, I'd ride to Westwood. I rode 30 minutes each way on my bicycle to get to and from school. And I ride all over the city. And that gives you a very different vantage point in the city than sitting in a car driving around, right? But I did that. And I started a business with a $50 investment. I was $85, but my partner and I each put $85 on a credit card, and that's how we started our business. And we sold it, last year for hundreds of millions of dollars. We started with nothing, right? There is a process that it takes to build a business and to build wealth. And it's not a mysterious process. We just need to take people who have done it and then bring those skills to these communities so that we can start building it. And so that in those communities, you don't have a block with a liquor store on either end and a bunch of boarded up shops in between. Like those, we can have a gym, we can have restaurants, we can have an all community owned, because we're investing in those communities. That's what investing in a community really means to me.
Thank you. Well, real quick on that front, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the City of LA's gross receipts business tax, but this is something that definitely impacts architecture. The architecture firms that are in LA, especially when they have clients, international clients, they're having to pay gross receipts business tax on those. Have you looked at ways to structurally reform the way that City of LA collects revenue so that it can afford these types of funds that you're referring to, which are more proactive investment strategies?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, first and foremost, I think I get offended when we talk about city taxes as revenues. Okay, revenue is something you earn from your customers, and I don't feel like the city treats us like customers, and I feel like they haven't earned that revenue. I call it it's more like tribute. You have to pay it in order to live in the city, right? I am well in favor of reforming our tax codes. I think the city has generated way too much money from the residents of the city. And the fact of the matter is, the most offensive thing about it is the way that they spend it, right? I mean, we have an $11.2 billion annual budget, and we've got people, stealing millions of dollars, right? Like the number 2 guy, the deputy in the city attorney's office, just got indicted for a $2 million bribery scheme. Okay, I'll tell you something, having run a business, and you're all a bunch of business owners here, right? People don't steal when they think they're going to get caught. Okay, the fact that people are stealing means that they know they're not going to get caught. And the fact that we caught this one guy and his $2 million, I promise you, there is tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of straight up corruption going on. And then that's putting aside just good old fashioned incompetence, okay? That $2 million bribe was related to the LADWP billing system implementation. I used to work in billing system implementation before I went to graduate school. They spent $350 million on that billing system. That's not a $350 million billing system, okay? That should have been a $40 or $50 million billing system, okay? So it's things like that. When you combine corruption with incompetence and with people who just don't understand technology, and they don't understand, like, you know, a lot of these elected officials who are appointed officials in the DWP case, they just don't know. And they get taken out to a fancy steak dinner by somebody at PricewaterhouseCoopers or at Ernst & Young, and next thing you know, there's a $350 million contract that comes through. We need people in leadership who actually understand how to spend money. I mean, in my business, if we ran out of money, guess what? Music stops, signs on the door, you're done, right? That's not the way it is in government. And because of that, you know, people waste the money. If you'll indulge me, I'll give you a very quick, funny anecdote. I was having lunch with a city council person. And she was talking about homelessness and some things she'd done around homelessness in her district. And she said, so if we just had the money, then we could do this all across the city. We could solve homelessness right now. I said, well, how much does it cost per person to give them the kind of services you're talking about? And she says, I don't know. I said, well, if you don't know how much it costs, then how do you know that we don't have enough money to do it? She goes, well, I don't know exactly how much it costs. I go, is it a lot or a little? Not much. Shouldn't be more than $50,000 a person. I said, that's not a lot of money. She goes, no, it's nothing. $50,000. Later in the conversation, I said, how much did you raise for your fund, for your campaign? She said, oh my God, I raised so much money. I raised $250,000. You can't, on the one hand, say $250,000, all the money in the world, because you had to raise it and you know what it means, and then you're willing to spend $50,000 per person times 50,000 people, right? Like politicians don't understand money in the way that business people do, and I think we just need a different perspective in the executive seat.
Thanks. So yeah, speaking of homelessness, and I agree, you know, when, you know, Andy Warhol paintings are being sold for 250 plus million, that means that we do have the funds. We're not short of revenue. We're not short of funds. It's just the way the money's being spent, the way society prioritizes investment. So day one, you're the mayor of Los Angeles, and we are working to address the homelessness crisis. What are you going to do? What steps can you take? Is it all about housing first? Is it a housing first policy, or you know, I don't want to put any words into your into your campaign, but I'm wondering what your value system is with addressing the crisis, and also maybe even your perspective on what are the root causes, because it's such a complicated and complex, and you know, this is something that's been happening to the society that we live in for the last 25, 30 years or even more. And so we can't fix it overnight, but I would wonder what is it that you would do day one and, you know, the first year?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. So look, I think that the first issue around homelessness is we need to understand that we're not dealing with a monolithic problem, but we've got several different types of problems and lots of reasons why people are homeless. Now, a lot of people will go by an encampment and they'll see people screaming to themselves or, you know, peeing on the sidewalk or whatever, and they say, okay, these people have mental health issues and they're addicted, okay? And that is factually accurate. Many, vast majority of homeless people have some form of mental health issues or some form of addiction. But the problem is that people think that people are homeless because they had mental health or addiction issues. In fact, it's the opposite. If you take a healthy person, you take you, Will, or take me, if I don't sleep well 3 nights in a row, by day 4, I'm a pretty different person, okay? Take that and multiply it by being on the streets, okay? You're on the streets, now you're in an insecure place, you're not getting proper sleep, you might get beaten, you might get robbed, you might get sexually assaulted, there's fear, there's anxiety. Within 30 days of being on the streets, any underlying issues you might have had will be greatly exacerbated, and you're very likely going to turn to the open air drug markets that we have for cheap drugs, and you'll end up addicted. So to us, it's that golden, you know, they talk about the golden hour in medicine. It's similar here. We need to help people in that first 30 days so that they don't descend into a cycle of homelessness from which it's very difficult to get back out. And so what do we do with that? You take these able-bodied people, Good example is a group of people who age out of the foster care system, okay? At 18 years old, you're out of the foster care system. Where do you go? Maybe you have nowhere to go and you end up on the streets, okay? We can, for $30,000 to $50,000 per unit, you can get container homes, right? These tiny homes, and we can put them onto city parks. You can do this all over the city, city parking lots. You can do it all over the city because the people you're housing in those units have not yet descended into the cycle where they're problematic in the neighborhood. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to do. Again, I'm very much a root cause person. I'm not a symptoms person. The root cause here is we need to cut off the supply of the new people coming on the streets and help them get landed on their feet. So that's the first thing I do. And I'll tell you, when I say it's $30,000 to $50,000 per unit, that's a real number. That's not some politician talking nonsense. And the nonsense they talk, we've seen when they're building units for $650,000 and $850,000 a unit for permanent supportive housing. That's a preposterous amount of money to spend. I mean, everybody on this call must know how ridiculous that is, right? And so innovation, we need to be innovative with transitional housing. So that's the first thing that we do. And then, as people's problems get more severe, we need to ratchet up the amount of mental health care and the amount of addictive care or addiction care that we give people so that we can help them get sober and get clean and get the meds that they need and stabilize, right? Now, that's not every homeless person. There are homeless people who like to live on the streets. They want to live outside, right? We can't act as though there are zero people who want to live free, right? They refuse shelter beds because they don't want to deal with a curfew, and they want to be able to bring their dog with them, and they want to be able to live like an adult. And they'd rather live in a tent than live in a project room key. Plenty of those people. And I'm fine with that. They just can't do it on Venice Beach. And you just can't do it, outside the VA. I think we can buy 400 acres outside of Lancaster. There's tons of land an hour from the city, tons of land. And we can build a beautiful, wonderful campsite, RV hookups, services, and anyone who wants to go and get a campsite there, you're welcome to it, okay? And we'll have wraparound services. That'll be way less expensive and way less disruptive than what our current plans are. But we need innovation. And the city has just thrown the same exact tools at the same problem, and they keep getting the same results. And somehow they're surprised by that. But as we know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So we need to stop that.
Well, thank you for that response. Have you had a chance to review the ballot initiative, the United to House LA ballot initiative, and do you have any thoughts on it?
I'm not familiar with this one.
Okay, it's the I think it's officially qualified for the ballot. It's the real estate transfer tax for anything over 5 million. A certain percentage would go into affordable housing. If you haven't had a chance to review it, I think that's something that you might want to kind of take a deeper dive into. I think we're going to be asking everyone, all of the, this will be on the November ballot. It's a big question, but to me, it's something that I think each of the candidates are coming up with their own responses. So
yeah, well, look, I think that if you're talking about the resetting of the property tax rates, right, upon sale, is that what you're talking about?
Well, it's a ballot initiative that would essentially do a real estate transfer tax of 5% of the sale of the property being sold, and that if it could generate around 800 million a year towards affordable housing. But once again, it's another tax. So people are really looking at whether or not this is the most effective way to raise that money, or if it becomes once more the details are still to be
I can say, generally speaking, I'm opposed to increases in taxes. So I think that I have a lot of wealthy friends, and I understand what it's like to pay a lot of taxes. People aren't bothered by the gross dollars of the taxes they pay. People don't begrudge paying their share, or in many cases more than their fair share. I think what people's problem is that the way that the government spends the money is incredibly inefficient. Like the level of incompetence with the way that the government spends the money should be disqualifying, right? And so my focus would be on getting as much as we can out of the $11.2 billion we're already collecting and not increasing that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. We're going to shift to candidate Gina Viola and have a 30-minute session with her, and then we'll come back full circle, and everyone in this room is invited to ask questions, and to, this is a conversation between us all. So with that, thank you so much, and Gina, welcome to the call. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I think this is a good segue. Maybe as you introduce yourself, maybe also talk a little bit about the people's budget for LA, because this sort of connects to what Mr. Varma was just talking about.
Somewhat, yes. A little bit different, but yes. So thank you for allowing me to address your group this evening. I'm pleased to be here. My name is Gina Viola, and I live in Hollywood, and I'm running to be mayor of Los Angeles. I am a mother of 2 LAUSD children, teenagers now, a local business owner the past 25 years. And I was asked by progressive activists at the last moment to run for mayor of Los Angeles when it became clear that our ideals were not being represented by the candidates running. After many years of attending city council meetings, board of police commission meetings, and providing support to our unhoused neighbors on the street, it has become clear to me that change needs to happen from inside the walls of City Hall. I want to reference architect Rick Corsini's open letter to mayoral candidates, his great city building letter. He's making the clear case for abolition in this letter. I read this letter and I thought, wow, this is the architect I want to build the new world. So, I am the abolitionist candidate running to be mayor of this city. And so his letter spoke very deeply to me. I don't know if he's on this call tonight, but the city has long suffered at the hands of career politicians who have continued to betray us at great cost. Our campaign is guided by integrity, transparency, and providing a clear vision aligned with the voters of Los Angeles who have repeatedly voted for shared power and prosperity. Measure Triple H to house the unhoused. LA County overwhelmingly voted for Measure R in the March of 2020 to implement alternatives to incarceration and increase oversight of law enforcement. Then in November of 2021, LA County passed Measure J, dedicating 10% of the county's budget towards those alternatives to imprisonment. The people of LA City and LA County have voted time and time again for opportunities for all to thrive, including our community's most vulnerable. Yet, our elected officials continue to fail to implement what we keep voting for here in Los Angeles. Rebuilding an equitable Los Angeles means investing in communities in a meaningful way. As mayor, we will redirect the overbloated police budget of this city into the areas that these resources are actually designed to address, such as housing, healthcare, a living wage, social programs, and community-led emergency response teams. We've got folks on the ground already building the tools we need to make this our reality, one being the People's Budget of Los Angeles. Led by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, it's a coalition doing the work surveying Angelenos citywide to see where they want their dollars going. The Sunrise Mute Movement and Youth Climate Strike are shouting from the rooftops to lead the way on climate change. It's time for adults to start listening to what the kids are saying, more than just a plaque commemorating them, right? Supporting sustainable and affordable housing projects that can break ground immediately, like LA Can's Eco Hoods. I think I'll talk about that a little bit later when answering questions. And one of the first things I would do is establish a paid council of unhoused or formerly unhoused citizens who will have receive a stipend to provide meaningful guidance on a truly holistic solution to the housing crisis in our city. We think we know what's best for unhoused folks, but if we haven't lived on the streets, we absolutely do not. Our administration will be working closely with communities of color to ensure that they are able to articulate for themselves the needs that are unique to their communities. And it's time for us to move towards a city of care. So thank you for letting me introduce myself. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, and that's a wonderful introduction, and I really appreciate you know, the perspective that you're bringing to this campaign. And I do wonder, you know, at Measure J, for instance, it was an incredible opportunity for us all to demonstrate our priorities. From your perspective, you know, this is really LA County, not City of LA, but why isn't more being done there? Like, do you have any analysis that you'd like to offer and how that translates over to what's going on with City of LA?
I do. You know, so we did Measure R was first, and we actually went through the signature gathering process to get Measure R on the ballot. And with Measure J, we had the county put it on as a charter amendment, which meant the county actually holds a great deal of the power implementing Measure J. In addition, the sheriff has actually sued Measure J, claiming it's unconstitutional. So it's being caught up in legalese right now. But additionally, you know, we've continued to put pressure on the Board of Supervisors. I'm part of a coalition, Justice LA, and we have several organizations there that are really holding the county's feet to the fire. And so they've renamed it. They're not calling it the Measure J dollars anymore. They're calling it the Care First budget. And to date, we have about $200 million committed towards it, which is a far cry from the $1 billion a year that we are anticipating. From a city perspective, I believe I can work with the city attorney to actually put pressure on the county to start releasing those dollars back to us. I mean, we are the largest portion of, you know, population-wise of LA County. So I won't just be coming for the Measure J dollars, I'll be coming for the Measure R dollars, because that was $3.5 billion to stop the jail expansion and invest in alternatives to incarceration. So the starting dollar amount is $3.5 billion plus an additional billion per year. So we're about 2 years in. So we're already looking at $5.5 billion that the county needs to redirect.
Well,
thank you for that question.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one of, you know, on your website, you mentioned a lot of the different policy initiatives that you're, you know, advocating for, and, you know, this is where the people's budget comes back to mind. From your perspective, how would that become implemented? Because it looks like it's per council district, and is there a, you know, often, like for instance with Metro or other public agencies, they'll send out a little survey, and, you know, you have $100 million to spend, like, what are your priorities? I think even Councilmember Paul Krikorian sent a similar type of survey where you as an individual get to really allocate your, you know, what your priorities are, knowing that there's a limited amount, you know, to choose from with regards to your budget. Like, how would you make the people's budget something that is actually not just a survey, but something that actually has power or
right
results?
So yeah, so along with the people's budget survey pledge is an agreement to have a participatory budgeting session in each of the 15 city council districts. And these are meaningful sessions. These are not, it's not a survey. These are half days in a park with the council member and the mayor, sitting and listening to the community members and having folks, you know, determine for themselves where they want their dollars to go. And if we have these sessions prior to the presentation of the first round of budgets, we're already making inroads with each council district that way. You know, the way the process works now is the mayor presents and I'm going to call it a cookie cutter budget because it looks exactly the same every year, with the exception of the police line item. That one has grown 52% in the last 10 years. No other line item has done that. So, you know, he presents the cookie, or he or she presents the cookie cutter budget to the city council. It goes through budget and finance, then it goes to the whole council, and it goes back to the mayor. There isn't this process of true engagement and connection with each council district before the budget is set. I think when we change how we do this and we truly do engage the communities in each district, and not just the communities, but coalition spaces much like this one. I would like to have participatory sessions with folks like your group, with folks like the Justice LA Coalition, with, you know, other community members who are on the ground doing work to make this city a better place to live. I think they should have a stake in where those budget dollars go. And I would encourage all your members that live in the city of Los Angeles to actually go to the website, peoplesbudgetla.com/survey, and take the survey and tell us where you want your dollars to go, because that's a jumping off place. You know, the participatory sessions are meant to really, truly be interactive and implemented holistically, not just that, like you said, not just a survey that one council member sends out and you're lucky if, you know, any of it gets implemented.
Well, thanks. So, you know, obviously front and center here, once again, is the crisis of the unhoused. You know, what perspective do you bring as a mayor of Los Angeles on day one, and, you know, under the first year, you know, how far are you going to go with helping to address this systemic issue?
Yeah, I've been saying this in almost every interview I have and almost every forum that I attend. 20th century US housing policy is deeply baked in racism. It is designed to build wealth for white people while extracting wealth from Black people in particular and people of color in general. This policy has been used not only to codify gentrification, but to feed the prison industrial complex atrocity that our state now has come to rely on as an industry. The first step in establishing an equitable system is to admit that it originates with this racism, that this is where the redlining comes from. And I can hear these solutions all day long by career politicians, but what I don't hear is an admission to how we got here, right? And I think without that, it doesn't matter what solutions we come up with. I'm sorry, traffic. I feel that, you know, it is time for us to move beyond that. When, you know, speaking to current events, when we see what happened in Buffalo over the weekend and how folks are emboldened through the white supremacy that is so prevalent in all of our systems and institutions, there has never been a greater time for us to finally reckon with this. And once we do that, then we can start writing new policy that's much more equitable. So that's the lens I intend to bring to it, is how we got here.
Okay, thank you. It's very true, because I feel like you can't really solve anything if you don't really understand the complexity of what you're actually trying to attempt to solve. Well, with you know, we mentioned the housing element earlier, and we have this goal of making sure that, you know, we're delivering 400,000 plus housing units over the next 10 years. As the mayor of LA, you know, what changes or reforms would you make with regards to the permit streamlining process? Or, you know, like, you know, this goes back to the budget, you know, how do we allocate resources to really process so that we can get more housing permitted, and especially how do you work with neighborhoods that might not even want that additional housing in their backyard?
Right. So again, you know, part of implementing the people's budget is the start to really developing tighter knit relationships with communities directly. It's all about connection and those relationships. And once we start involving one another in the decisions for how our monies are being spent, folks will have a greater buy-in for what we're attempting to accomplish. You know, once we have folks seeing that healthy, resourced communities are safe communities, they may not be so opposed to mixed level, you know, affordable housing units in their areas. Developing these relationships, it's tantamount to everything. You know, what we've done is we retreated to our silos. We've relied upon next door to frighten us. We've, you know, the Ring doorbell, the gates around our houses. I've heard the chief of police say out loud directly that the way to be safest in your community is to know your neighbors. Know your neighbors, right? The more you have neighborhood, you know, and we do have neighborhood councils, but even they have become quite, I don't know what they've become insular. They really have, you know, it's a select few group of people who are certain they know what's best for their neighborhood. And what I've experienced, because I've attended many, many neighborhood council meetings at this point now, trying to get to all 101, which I don't think is going to happen before June 7th, but I'm trying. that's what I see. I see a lot of contentious, I see a small group of folks who think they know best for their neighborhood and the rest trying to get a word in edgewise. I think once we start from this new approach of this is a people-centered, budget that we're going to be presenting for the city, the dollars and cents of it talks to people. It really does. When they have a buy-in for how their monies are going to be allocated, and then you get to reap the rewards, you get to really feel the rewards of how those dollars are being allocated, it develops trust. And I think with this decades long of political betrayal that we're up against, with city council members in jail, on their way to jail, board of supervisors on their way to jail, it is really difficult to get people to want to, trust the government to do something different. But
well, thank you.
Sure.
So back to climate action. AIA Los Angeles, we support having the city of LA adopt the zero code for California, which essentially is 100% electric for all new construction. It also mandates that all on-site renewables, as well as if you can't generate energy you need on site, then you would procure 100% renewables through DWP for the life of the project. We have mentioned this many times to current leadership, and everybody loves the idea, but no one's really willing to sort of adopt it as the code. It's ready to be adopted. And I'm wondering, what's your perspective with regards to building decarbonization and embodied carbon and strategies that you'd like to see City of LA move towards to address our climate?
My website front and center says abolish fossil fuel drilling on day one. I am not for an incremental approach to tackling the climate crisis. So I am not opposed to signing a 2022 zero code for California. I think it's imperative that we do it now. I also think it's imperative that we seek counsel from indigenous groups on how to tackle this process. I am shocked that has not made more inroads. I'm very pleased to have been endorsed by both the Youth Climate Strike and the Sunrise Movement Los Angeles. And I've also signed their pledge, the Sunrise Movement's Green New Deal for Los Angeles, which is, achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions through a fair and just transition for all communities and workers. So I'm definitely of the mindset that while I have made race and racial equity the forefront of our campaign, if we don't have a planet to equitably live on, I recognize that and environmental justice is racial justice, because the communities that are suffering most from our environmental impacts are communities of color. 86% of the drinking water in Watts has lead in it. This is atrocious. And if it was like this on the West Side, it would be corrected tomorrow. So climate is definitely at the forefront of our campaign as well.
So as it's related, especially for communities of color and lack of tree canopy, have you had a chance to see what the LA Forestry put out their streets guidebook for basically how to radically redesign our streets so that you can essentially make a tree canopy a priority for neighborhoods. What is your experience with only working with whether it's tree people or other groups that make this a front and center issue, but how important is it to you, especially from your perspective on how it might not only address climate change, but also help sort of correct some of the the long-standing issues of crime based on the connection to sense of place and sense of beauty for place.
Yeah. So another pledge I've signed, and I'm not sure if your group is familiar with it, but LA Streets for All has a 25 by 25 pledge, and I've signed that. And it's got a wonderful plan for reducing traffic and increasing boulevards, and much like you said, with tree canopy, with even some walk streets, no cars at all. Los Angeles has been built for driver convenience, at the expense of people walking, riding bikes, using transit. Because of this, the majority of Angelenos drive to work. 75% in 2017 were driving to work because they don't have other safe, reliable options, including walking. 86% of our public right of way is devoted to car use and storage. We need to move away from being a car culture so that we can incorporate, far more green canopy. And if you look at, what happened to the green canopy in South LA and why, those trees were removed so that the helicopters could have a better vision flying over. So again, when we get to the root cause of why some stuff has occurred, I think it will be far more manageable to implement some of these big sweeping changes immediately.
So you mentioned the Streets for All pledge. Is that also connected to the Healthy Streets LA ballot initiative? Are you familiar with that? And if you had a chance to review?
Yes, it's the same group. Absolutely. Okay. Yep.
And if people on this call aren't familiar, this may also have recently qualified for signatures for the November ballot, but essentially would just, from my understanding, would be a charter amendment that basically says that the city of LA must enforce their mobility element update, as opposed to having the choice for council to choose not to put together certain complete streets or bike lanes or active transportation elements.
And it actually, the 25 by 25 actually achieves what Garcetti set out to do with that Vision Zero by 2025. If we make good on this 25 by 25, we'll actually achieve that, because right now we're not on track to be anywhere close to having that happen by 2025.
Well, and also speaking of ballot initiatives, and we heard one of your competitors there. Have you had a chance to look at the United House LA ballot initiative? And
absolutely, I helped gather signatures for it.
So
yeah, when we were getting signatures for being on the mayor's race, we actually took pages for the United to House LA and got signatures for that as well. I'm a big proponent of that. I'm excited it made the ballot, and I'm looking forward to it passing in November.
Well, thank you for being outspoken with your support for that. It's refreshing to hear, because I feel like all candidates that we're asking, some of them, we're giving them the chance to tell us that they're not familiar, of course, but I think everyone should be familiar with such a bold initiative.
Yeah.
Well, so kind of going full circle, can you share with us a little bit about your relationship to architecture and design, and how this, because there's a lot of sensitivity out there that development is bad, and you even on your website sort of reference corporate development and how you're making sure you're not receiving any campaign donations. But so how do we sort of bring everyone together so that development isn't seen as bad, especially knowing that we need to build so many housing? Like what is your?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a big difference between luxury development that moves into a historic neighborhood and prices everybody out of it. And then there's what we need to do, which is build for mixed income level, sustainable, affordable, no income, low income, all of it, right? So I think architects are going to be imperative. And it's going to be imperative that we have architects on the boards and the commissions, because you truly are going to be the visionaries that orchestrate how we will make good use of the land that we have. We have a tremendous amount of government-owned land here in the city of LA. And I think with a lot of creativity, much like I referenced it earlier, Los Angeles Community Action Network, they are an organization down in Skid Row known as LA Can. They've developed something called Eco Hoods, and they are small, micro, sustainable homes that are planned to be built in communities of 10 to 12 homes, right, on plots of land. These are homes, not tiny sheds, homes. They have a bathroom, they have a kitchen, they have a bedroom, they have a living space. And they can be built for about $20,000 more than what we're currently spending on those tiny sheds for transitional housing. And I think architects will be instrumental in finding creative ways to utilize this government land to be able to put projects much like this on. I don't think we need to rely on pre-built modular things that are already done. I think we can actually build. If you look at their the Eco Hoods planned, I mean, they're planned to be built. They're not. It's not a yurt that's getting delivered or a pallet.
And with that, I love LA Can, and we've had Pete White at several of our conferences, and they just are such an important part of our community. Can you tell us a little bit whether or not that program is sort of, I guess this is my long-winded way of asking you about SB 9 and your position on that. I know it's state law now. City of LA is trying to implement it in a way that makes it helpful to communities as opposed to harmful. But it sort of goes full circle with how do we make sure that we have these opportunities for urban infill, for smaller homes that are,
Yeah.
that create wealth generation opportunity for first-time home buyers.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. I've spoken to Pete at length about this, and one of the frustrating things for them is they came to the city 10 years ago with the Eco Hoods plan, and it took the city 5 years to finally agree this is probably a good idea. Maybe we should pilot it. And then, so another 5 years later, they finally have a piece of land to do it on. But again, there's no will to put dollars to it. So they're actually going out and they're going to try and raise the money themselves privately, crowdsource the money to build one, because it's sort of this thing, let's build it, show the city how much it works. So that then we'll roll it out more effectively.
And is it on city-owned land, or is it?
I think the first one is it's a piece of county property.
Okay.
So it's a county partnership that they're going to do the first one on, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, there's city, county, and state land. I mean, I am astounded at how much property the state of California owns in Los Angeles, and how many empty homes the state of California owns in Los Angeles. And I am definitely very interested. I keep joking with the city attorney, the gentleman running for city attorney. I'm like, you're going to have the hardest job on day one when we win, because I am coming for all that land.
Well, it's not only state land, but county land, the school district,
school
City of LA. It's just
right.
amazing how much public land we have available that's underutilized.
That's right.
Well, I want to shift directions here and invite Tracy Stone, who's one of the co-chairs of our Government Outreach Committee. We also have Rick Corsini here as well, who is one of the co-chairs of the Government Outreach Committee. Tracy, you have a couple of good questions here. Do you want to sort of share your thoughts on this?
Sure, and I think it's interesting to hear about some of these other efforts to bring sensible plans, perhaps, or ideas to LA, and how difficult it can be sometimes to change the culture or get ideas moving. So along those lines, obviously we have a raft of legislation recently coming out of the state assembly that overrides local laws in order to hopefully, according to them, move forward on housing production. And in response, I think there's a lot of concern about this idea that the state can override local laws, and should they be able to. And so I was curious to know what you think about this, and should we accept these as a way to maybe move forward more quickly towards creating more housing, or should we be pushing back and trying to retain this kind of control at the city level?
Sorry, I had a hard time hitting the unmute. I think that we've been so woefully behind on acting with any urgency that I am willing to push forward with state mandated regulations and use it as a springboard to then go beyond what the state is mandating of us. But I think if that gets things moving, in a much quicker fashion than we have been accustomed to, then I don't have a problem with enforcing what the state is mandating.
Thanks, Tracy. And Tracy, you also had a follow-up on that. Did you want to?
Is Ramit still here? Is he gonna answer?
So yeah, unfortunately, Ramit, he informed me that he had to jump to another meeting and isn't available.
Oh, okay.
for Q&A.
Okay.
So it's only going to be with you.
All right. I just didn't want to take all of his time.
Thank you. But yeah, Tracy, did you want to talk about the cost of various building requirements and
Sure.
what the city of LA itself can do to make housing more affordable?
Yeah, so, we have a number of different programs over the years that have been enacted, like linkage fees, which continue to impose fees on new projects in order to pay for affordable housing. And a lot of that makes perfect sense, but there are a number of occasions that we run into where building officials have some subjective ability about whether or not to impose certain requirements. And I'm not talking necessarily about, things that are in the building code, but they can come down to interpretations. And it's very frustrating because they will happily say, oh yeah, no, you have to do that, when it's a very subjective requirement. And the result is that you're adding thousands and thousands of dollars with each one of these to every housing unit created. And obviously housing is very expensive. Everyone is so frustrated by it. But this was an arena that I was able to see Osama Yunin have a lot of impact on when he was running the Green Code Task Force and looking at how to implement the state's Green Code in Los Angeles. And he assembled a group of contractors and developers and building managers and all the different trades and architects to talk about the ramifications of each one of these items and how could we find the most cost-effective way to implement them effectively and still achieve the goals of the Green Building Code. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we might hold building officials accountable for some of these subjective things that they are putting on buildings that we don't really see a return on investment on. They're not making them safer. They're just absolutely, in my opinion, random sometimes requirements. Is there a way that we could educate them, or do you have any thoughts on how we can maybe grab onto this problem?
Yeah, I think, what you're speaking to again is like the political betrayal that we've all been shell-shocked from, right? I think, you have your largest developers with the most influence who can sit down in front of a city council member and not have any of those fees assessed on their projects. In fact, not even pay tax on their projects oftentimes, right? Like look at LA Live, and how many years they got with the sunset on the hospitality tax. Yet here we are talking about, smaller projects. And the other frustrating thing is you don't see the affordable housing being built, right? You're paying these fees for affordable housing, and yet you see 64,000 people living on the streets in our cities. So, all of that needs direct reassessment. And I hate to say it, but there's a lot of cleaning house that has to get done in our city, right? We have to stop being beholden to the biggest players and the ones with the direct access to the city council people and the city council people staff and the people on the planning and land use committee, right? This has been a huge problem in our city for a long, long time. And I am not adverse, like I said, poor city attorney, he's going to have a very hard job, he or she. I am not adverse to holding people to task on that and deciding that, what's good for one project is good for all projects. It can't be randomly assigned. I hear that a lot from folks, In fact, one builder told me that when he went down to get a permit, it was a $35,000 permit. And he said, what is this for? And they said, we don't even know. We don't know what this permit is for, but you need to pay it. And I was shocked as he was telling me this story, but he said, that's actually quite normal. That's how the city operates. So, you know, part of the reason I'm running is because of these years and years of political betrayal by our leaders. So I am hoping that as an outsider and somebody not beholden to any of those big money interests, nor party, nor unions, I mean, no one, I am beholden to my constituents who have donated $24 at a time, and, you know, folks who've shown up and folks who've been on the street, like doing the work and trying to care for our community. That's who, you know, I'm going to have helping me make decisions about a lot of this stuff. I hope that answered it sufficiently.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Gina. Rick Corsini, you're on the call. Do you want to add your voice here?
Are you kidding? No, I'm pleased to have both of your ears here, and I'm interested to see what your responses might be to a couple of important questions. I think, you know, both of the candidates here have talked about, well, we've certainly been talking about governance, and how decisions get made in a city as large as Los Angeles. And it's especially interesting when we add to the mix the state of California starting to weigh in on all of our local decisions, right? So it gets to a point of local decision making versus top down, or grassroots versus top down decision making. And Gina, you've been talking about the importance of that grassroots communication among neighbors, even if it's not necessarily out, maybe it's outside of the neighborhood council system, which starts to become its own kind of top-down, non-grassroots approach. But as everyone knows, is we have a weak mayor system, and we have only 15 council members. And there's been a lot of discussion about expansion of those council members to double them to 31 or something like that. That would weaken the individual power of each of the fiefdoms, which seems potentially like a good idea. But we're also, as you were saying earlier, there's an imperative here to act quickly, which tends to move towards a more centralized top-down approach, hence SB 9 and state mandated kinds of policies that tend to cause people to recoil about that imposition. I kind of think about this a lot like an equivalent as the 1960s during the civil rights movement. And it's a question of, who integrates the lunch counters, right? How do we build affordable housing? And if are you going to rely on the states of Alabama and Georgia to do it? Or is there going to need to be a federal mandate to build that affordable housing, right? Very similar kind of situation when your values really are about a more grassroots decision-making process, but then you also understand that grassroots approach could actually result in what we're experiencing now is NIMBYism. We don't want it in our backyards. We don't want those people next to me, right? How do you see balancing that kind of need for centralized decision-making to, for instance, position homeless shelters and permanent supportive housing equitably throughout the city versus that decentralized approach that can tend towards a siloization within neighborhood council districts?
Yeah, that's it's a lot. I mean, this is a huge city in a huge county in a huge state, right? Everything is supersized here. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we have been criminalizing poverty for so long now. We have taught people to fear poverty. And when we start to redistribute our funds in a more equitable fashion, and we start to resource communities that have been so sorely divested from decade after decade, and start seeing the health of those communities flourish, crime will go down and a feeling of safety will return. You know, a big part of why I've seen this NIMBY, what we're calling NIMBY, I use different words, but a big part of why we've seen this grow is because we've had a situation where the income inequality has exploded on steroids so quickly. And we're using this decades old policy of this public-private partnership, right? These vouchers for housing, right? We were going to let the market help us with affordable housing. And we fell woefully behind in that. And next thing we know, we have 64,000 people sleeping on our streets in our city. And what folks did was they moved away, right? Instead of just deal with the problem, they said, okay, I'm not going to live downtown anymore. I'm not going to live in Venice anymore. I'm not going to live in Hollywood anymore. I'm going to go move to the Valley. I'm going to go move to the West Side. And now there are houseless folks there too now. And I remember hearing the rhetoric of how angry people were, like, I moved all the way out here so I wouldn't have to look at that. And that's really at the heart of what the situation is. We've dehumanized folks and blamed folks who were forced to live on the streets for the conditions that occur when folks are living on the streets. And when we come at it from this human place and start to, and it's truly an education is what it is. It's more than, I'm sorry, I'm Councilwoman Nuri taking Kim Kardashian to the LA River to, hide in the taxi cab looking at houseless folks. One of the most incredible opportunities I got when the pandemic hit, I staffed trade shows for a living. So my work went away completely. I did not have a single trade show for 17 months. And it gave me this unique time and opportunity to do a deep dive into this city, because I saw how woefully inefficient the response to the pandemic was. And I thought, who is governing over this city? Like, what is happening? Who calls the shots? And what I've discovered is, a city that gives the lion's share of its budget to law enforcement to solve all of our problems, none of our problems get solved. And that is really at the heart of where we are. For the city, the LAPD's budget has grown 52% in the last 10 years. No other line item has done that, right? So we have not made any real investments locally at the grassroots level to try and combat this. So now we have the state pressing down on us. I, as mayor, you say we have a weak mayor system. I intend to change that, right? The budget is the most powerful thing the mayor has. The reason it feels weak is because we just hand it all over to the police. The budget doesn't change. It's a cookie cutter budget for 10 years. If you see a budget drastically change to reinvest in the city, that's going to be a powerful mayor. If you see a mayor who's willing to change the faces of all of those commission members and all of those people that sit on those planning use boards, that's a powerful mayor. A mayor who shows up at city council, a mayor who shows up at those participatory budgeting sessions with a city council person. I intend to be a working mayor. I keep saying I'm not a politician, but now I am because I'm running for mayor. So I have to just accept that. But I have, like Ramit, I have no aspirations beyond running for mayor. I truly don't. In fact, in one of my interviews, he shocked me. He asked me the question, if you don't win, what's next? Are you going to run for something else? And I just went, nope, on TV for everyone to see. So, I intend to be not a weak mayor at all. So pushing back on the state, sure, they can tell us we have to orchestrate SB 9. They can go ahead and give us every single piece of state property that they own here in the city of LA.
Fair enough.
Rick, did you have any additional thoughts or?
Well, just to follow up on what you're saying here, I agree. I really agree with you. But specifically to me, the track is, to what degree would you, how would you balance that sort of consolidated power that you would consolidate through the budget to implement that out in the grassroots? How would you take that to the various neighborhood councils and community groups as they have to kind of review and bring their input to the housing element as it gets implemented throughout the city? I mean, this housing element is calling for redistributing the 400 some odd thousand housing units that we need at 50,000 housing units per year.
Mhm.
That's another question. How are you going to get those all permitted? Those 50,000 housing units per year are slated to be going into high opportunity neighborhoods. That's
Yeah.
Encino, Studio City, West LA, not in South LA,
Right.
right? How do you sell that? And I think we could all agree that that's the right thing to do. It's certainly the most efficient way to build housing through, TOC and other mechanisms that we already have. And we know the data is there that tells us that this is the most equitable way to redistribute housing for the benefit of those who need it most, is to put them into high opportunity areas. So now how do you sell that to those people without demurring, and get, and to build it all there where we need it?
Using like workforce housing language, I find is very helpful. When you start to point out that teachers can't afford to live anywhere near the schools they're teaching in, tends to have an impact on neighborhoods. They want to hear that. They want to speak to that. People like to go out to restaurants. Should folks have to drive 2 hours to work in the restaurant? Or any of the other service sectors that we so desperately need to make our communities like Studio City and Encino pretty unlivable. So I think when you talk about it in terms of workforce housing, that can be very, very helpful. Also, there's a lot of empty housing in Los Angeles. And this is another thing I think we need to explore and push back on neighborhoods. I think we need to do a drill down of just how much of Encino is sitting empty. How much. I can tell you where I live right by the Hollywood Bowl. A third of my hill is empty. The 3 houses behind me, 2 of them have been empty since I've lived here for 9 years. Third one's been empty for the last 3 years. So I think, once we start positioning things and pushing back that we all have a stake in our communities' well-beings and the people who come and go from them, even if it's just to work there, not to live there. I think a vacancy tax is long overdue. Mike Bonin introduced the vacancy tax again at the beginning of the pandemic. And can you imagine it was shelved for 2 years? I mean, how do you even shelve a motion for that length of time? But this just goes to show you where the power is in this city, right? Like we can't even get a discussion about a vacancy tax on the table. That goes to show you something is seriously wrong. So when you talk about expanding the city council, I'm all for that. I think we do far better with 31 city council members and let neighborhood councils go back to beautifying the neighborhood and having holiday parties and doing block parties and getting to know your neighbors. I mean, it sounds funny, but like, it's lovely. Like that's what my neighborhood council does. We don't even have city letterhead at all. We wrap presents up at Yamashiro and we did a block party once a year and a cleanup day. And it was great. I got my babysitters that way. I got, yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting correlation. Like if you really did, I mean, when we had when we went through charter reform in 2000, 2002, whenever, the whole idea was to bring more power to the neighborhoods and decentralize the mayor and all the kind of the apparatus, the city planning department, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that also became a big obstacle to doing the big things that we need to, like building transit and building more housing and more parks and homeless housing, et cetera, because that decision-making became overly decentralized. So maybe the idea of further decentralizing the council members weakens them individually, which will then put a need for greater coordination centralized through the mayor's office, right? So it's, however that works, we know what we've got now does not work.
Right.
And we need another way of doing it. That we know.
That we know. In fact, that's, when I am afforded the opportunity to be with what the LA Times would have you believe are the only candidates running, I don't miss an opportunity to say, why haven't you done these things already when they present their plans? Because we know that you know. And they also tell me that I don't know how things work. And I said, well, that's because I don't see many things working. So maybe that's why I don't know how things work. It's hard to be an outsider running for mayor, let me tell you.
Yes, I'm sure.
Well, personally, I just thought it was a disservice to the community for the LA Times to do the polls the way they have, because they really start to limit the opportunities for everyone to start thinking about each candidate with equal footing. And knowing how many undecided votes there are out there, I think this is still an open race.
The undecided keeps going up. That should tell you they don't want the 5 candidates you keep showing, you know, that, and there are several of us running active campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Well, I truly, respect your time and really appreciate your willingness to connect with us. As I mentioned to everyone else on the call, if you have any questions or thoughts, please let us know now. Unfortunately, Mr. Varma was not able to participate in the Q&A with us, but with that's just more time with you, Gina. We really look forward to strengthening our relationship with you. I feel that the more that the AIA community, the architecture and design community can connect with neighborhood groups, the better, and that's something that we really want to build relationships with. So I'll give you the floor for any final thoughts, and if any closing remarks.
I would just encourage folks that, the primary is the time to vote for who you want, right? It's unlikely anyone is getting more than 50%. So my expression has been vote your heart in the primary. In November, we may have to do what we have to do, but what we have running now are career politicians who frankly have been in government, from various seats for quite a long time. And the city is in what I would just describe as a state of ruin. But we are looking to kick off a complete renaissance in the city of Los Angeles, restoring the spirit of a city that has literally defined what progressive and artistic culture looks like for the entire world. It's time to unify our efforts, no longer based on our shared traumas, but instead on our future, a future where we can show the world what a city of shared prosperity and power looks like. So I appreciate your time tonight, and hopefully I got some of your votes.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And Rick and Tracy also, thank you very much for all that you do. And we look forward to everyone joining us for more of these mayoral candidate forums. This is such a great opportunity for the AIA. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Have a beautiful day.
You too.
Thanks, Rick.